religious things. And then thirdly, and we're moving quickly, verse 18, Paul says, don't let anybody intimidate you with mysticism, telling you that Christ is not enough. You need Christ plus some other experience. Now, let me tell you what mysticism is, okay? Mysticism is a deeper, higher religious experience based on personal intuition. Did you get that? Mysticism is a deeper, higher religious experience based on personal intuition. You know what it really is? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Mysticism is nothing. It's just something you think is something. It is not what you think it is. And yet people think it is what they think it is. People came along to the Colossians and they said there's a higher, there is an ascending, there is a surpassing, there is a paranormal, there is a supernatural, a higher, deeper spiritual knowledge, there is a mystical piety, there is a plane of humility connected with aeons and angels and demigods and emanations, and we need to ascend to that level. Verse 18, let me give you the New American Standard because it's a very difficult verse to translate from the original. The NAS has captured it. Let no one keep defrauding you of your prize, take away your reward, by delighting in self-abasement and the worship of angels, taking his stand on visions he has seen, inflated without cause by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body by joints and bands, having nourishment ministered and knit together, increases with the increase of God. And that all means that Christ is the one who really builds the body. Don't let anybody beguile you, woo you, deceive you, deny you your reward by engulfing you in some delightful self-abasement, which means a proud humility. And the worship of angels, taking his stand on visions he has seen, which do nothing but inflate without any cause his fleshly mind. That's a big ego trip, Paul says. All these people who are into mysticism. It's coming at us like a flood, folks. Like a flood. All the mysticism that's encroaching upon the church, this new wave interest in missions where they're saying we'll never reach the world without signs and wonders, and they're having courses in seminary on miracles and signs and wonders, and they're teaching people how to get into the other dimension, how to get into the other paradigm. They use that term of the third world and think mystically, and it's nothing but sheer imagination at best, and at worst you are courting demons. Courting demons. It's just not true. A man said to me, sometimes when I'm shaving, Jesus comes in the bathroom and puts his arm around me in the morning and talks to me. I said, you mean the real Jesus? He said, yes. I said, and he puts his arm around you and you see him? He said, yes. And I just had one question. Do you keep shaving? Or do you fall on your face on the ground in terror because you're in the presence of a holy God? If you keep shaving, it wasn't Jesus. He said, do you believe that? I said, no, I don't believe it, but what's worse, I believe you believe it. That's mysticism. It's nothing, but you believe it's something. And some people, sad to say, it's not enough to believe in Christ. They pursue the paranormal, the supernatural, the mystical, the intuitive, and they make things happen in the mind that aren't happening, and they open themselves to things that do happen from demonic sources. It's a frightening thing to think about. Frightening. Did you read in the paper yesterday about Oral Roberts? Did you read that what happened was the other day the devil came in his room? And while he was laying in bed, the devil got both hands on his neck, and the devil was trying to strangle him to death. And he had to call Evelyn to come and get the devil off him. And so he called her, and she came and got rid of the devil. Folks, if that's true, we should be listening to Evelyn, not Oral. mean, you understand that, don't you? Why is it that people pursue that? I'll tell you why. Because somewhere in their theology, they have bought into the fact that it's not enough to have Christ. And they're into all these experiences with angels and so forth. I remember when we tried to get some quotes out of a book written by the Hunters. They wouldn't let us quote it. I wanted to quote them in the Charismatic book, but they had a whole thing in there from their book about they were flying into Chicago and the wings were wobbling. And while they were flying in there, they were so nervous because the wings were wobbling. And I figured that happened about every time I fly into Chicago. But this was bothering them. And they just cried out to God, and they looked out the window, and there was this big angel who flew right up and just grabbed that wing and stabilized that thing. And, they went on to describe all this and how many different times. And a guy up in Idaho wrote this entire book about all these angels doing this and doing that and experiencing this and experiencing that. And I really personally believe, for one, that God doesn't send His holy angels in visible ways to reinforce people whose theology is aberrant. Secondly, I've been serving the Lord a long time, and there may have been some angels around, but I haven't been aware of them. I just think there are people whose faith, that's not great faith that brings those supernatural experiences. That's doubt looking for proof that fantasizes those experiences. Mysticism is nothing but the indiscreet action of a fallen intuition, or at worst, demonic. But there are people running around intimidating the socks off Christian people because they're not having those experiences. You're not having a miracle? In fact, the latest thing that Mr. Roberts said was that if you don't send me money, you're not going to get a miracle. Well, who would be intimidated enough to buy into that? I'll tell you who. Lots of folks who send millions of dollars to buy a miracle. They line up. They say, this is great faith. You have to have great faith. It's not great faith. That's great distrust in the sufficiency of Christ, in the sufficiency of His Word. And you usher yourself into a very, very, very dangerous environment. The environment of human imagination is dangerous enough, but when it gets tangled up with the demonic forces of the other world, it's even more frightening. No, there's no higher plane. There's no surpassing experience. There's no deeper life. Christ is all in all. These people do this, it says, because they delight in humility, and all it does is puff up their fleshly mind. Isn't that a tragic diagnosis? But that's a fact. Christ is not enough. Supposed humility is nothing but ugly pride. Worshipping angels, seeking visions, building everything on these kinds of mystical experiences strikes a blow against the sufficiency of Jesus Christ. They're not holding fast to the head who is Christ. He's the one from whom the entire body, supported and held together by joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. You want to grow, you grow because you hang on closely to Christ. He's all you need. It isn't, well, let's receive Christ, and boy, let's hope that we don't get stuck at that level. I was speaking one time. I was asked to speak to a group of people on the subject of my belief on tongues because they had the assumption that somehow I had gotten the gift of tongues. And I don't know how they got that, but they asked me to speak to a luncheon of about 300 men. And they were so happy to have me there, and they introduced me, and I thought they wanted me to speak on what I believe the Bible teaches about tongues, and so I thought they were wanting another view to just know the other side. This was at a restaurant in Glendale. Jay was with me. So I went in, and I stood up and took my Bible, and I just took off. And things began to move on the table, and shaking things, and they were moving around, and it seemed a little bit strange, but I just kept pumping and pumping. Finally, this is the only time it ever happened in my life, I felt someone grab my coat. And he pulled me down, away and down into a chair. right in the middle of what I was saying. And then pushed me aside and got up and said, well, I'll just tell you this. We regret this, something of that effect. But I'll never forget what he said. I don't know the exact words, but it went like this, I think, Jay, you'll remember. All we can do is pray that sometime in the middle of the night, remember that? God zaps you, and you come rising out of your bed to speak in a heavenly language. Frankly, I'd rather have the sleep, you know. You understand do you understand I'm not seeking that? I'm not trying to be ungracious, but I'm just telling you Christ is sufficient. And I don't need to see angels. And I don't need to have visions. And I don't need to rise to some higher level, some deeper life, some other plane. I have more in the sufficiency of Christ than I can even commit myself to. By the way, I did get back up and say I wasn't quite finished.